I debated on releasing a video today because I was just really pressed for time. But then I thought about all of you guys and how much I enjoy reading the comments from you all. A special shout out to Timmy, Jody, and Mary. So here's a story for you. Sorry, it's a little on the shorter side. I grew up in a rural section of the Appalachian Mountains. I loved it there. There was a peace in those mountains that I've never found anywhere else. The air was clean and crisp, and the woods were incredibly quiet, which I guess some people don't like. I was used to it though, since it was all I'd ever known. But I had an encounter one year that changed my feelings about the place. It was during hunting season. My uncle had come up from Florida to go deer hunting with us. He had come up a little before the season started, so he and my dad could go over all of their gear. I was in my late teens then. I had a dog that was part Alaskan Husky and part German Shepherd. I'd go hiking pretty often and my dog Max would always go with me. He was a good-sized dog given the two breeds he was mixed from. He didn't scare easily and was really protective. The day before hunting season started, we were out on one of our usual hikes. We'd go up the hill behind my parents' house to an old cold mining road. There were a couple of cold water springs near the road. Usually when we got within 100 feet or so of the springs, Max would run ahead and get a drink and cool off. Well, he took off, and because of the trees and the brush, I couldn't see him, but I knew where he would be. I stopped and took a drink from my water bottle. As soon as I started moving again, I heard Max running back down the hill. I figured he was coming back to check on me, but he was running full force toward me with a panicked look on his face. I'd never seen that look before. He turned around to look up the hill, and he bared his teeth. Then he started growling, very low and frightening. He was standing stock still, just facing up the hill. I called his name, and he gave a big yelp and took off running full force down the hill again. I thought that was odd, but I kept heading up. I knew Max would just go on home if that's what he wanted to do. I was hoping to see what might have spooked him. There wasn't much wildlife to be feared at the time. Usually just squirrels and chipmunks and possums and stuff. The scariest thing might be a bobcat, but I'd never seen one the whole time I'd lived there. I reached the top of the hill without seeing anything scary. I was leaving when I spotted these antlers through the trees. There was a lot of rustling noise coming from that spot, which was a little weird because in my experience, deer are usually so silent. I couldn't imagine Max getting spooked by a deer. He'd been around plenty of them. Anyway, I hoped it was a good sign of whitetail in the area for the start of hunting the next day. I turned to head down suddenly and I was hit with this absolutely putrid smell of rotten flesh. Like if you forgot some meat in your fridge for months and then opened it up. I headed out of there and got home and found Max in the yard waiting for me. He seemed really restless and pacing around. I couldn't figure him out. I told my dad and uncle that I had spotted a deer. They were excited to get going the next morning. We got up at first light and headed out. We were real amateurs when it came to deer hunting, but my dad had found a spot he liked and had set up the pop-up blind the week before. We got to the blind, which was set up near this stream. I had binoculars with me so I could do some bird watching while we were sitting there. Waiting on deer can get incredibly boring. You have to be so quiet. Even the snacks we brought were not the crunchy kind, but I was ready to pay attention. We'd probably been there a couple hours when we started hearing this high-pitched sound that sounded like a wounded animal or something. We didn't see anything. It could have been anything, really. But the next thing that happened was we were hit with that terrible smell of rotting meat. My God, I can't describe it. It smelled like death. My uncle gasped and pointed towards the creek. He had his hand over his nose trying to cover up the smell. We looked and saw this horrible apparition rise up out of the creek, and it was standing there 30 yards away. It was something tall and skeletal. The head looked like a deer skull with antlers, and these yellow glowing eyes out of the sockets. I swear this thing was 7 feet tall, and it seemed like it had tattered flesh just hanging off of its body. It was walking on 2 legs, and they looked like they were legs of a deer. It seemed like something you would dig out of a grave, but it was moving and scanning the forest. We all just crouched there peering out of the blind. It didn't seem to have seen us. We were petrified and just stayed quiet and didn't move a muscle. Then it lifted its head and stared into the distance like it had spotted something. And then it just flashed away at superhuman speed. I can't even describe how it moved. It was just gone. We split out of there as fast as we could. We didn't even speak. We all sped down the mountain like our lives depended on it. To this day, we have no explanation what the hell that thing was. And I'm sad that I don't feel comfortable in those woods anymore, but I feel like that was a really close call. My family lived in a rural part of Illinois when I was around 10. We moved in with my grandmother because she wasn't doing so well. She didn't live too far away from our own house, so usually my mom stayed with my grandma, and my sister and I, with our stepdad Keith, would visit a few times a week and help out with cleaning and other chores. We were very close to my grandma, and she was the quintessential grandma too. She had a snack drawer from when we came over, and definitely spoiled us. We weren't close with our dad's side of the family, and our stepdad's parents had passed, so grandma was all we had. Her house was older, but it was still in pretty good shape. She had a bedroom on the first floor since she had trouble going up the stairs, and my mom slept in her childhood bedroom on the second floor. When my sister Martha and I stayed over, we'd take sleeping bags and sleep on the floor, and it was kind of like camping. But usually, we were at home with Keith. I remember very specifically that we had spent the weekend at Grandma's house and had a movie night. By this time, Grandma was a little out of it and very tired. But she still liked to dote on Martha and I and tell us stories. A lot of them were superstitious. She talked about how she had a baby who died a few months after being born, and how the baby was still in the house with her. This kind of weirded Martha and me out, but our mom acted like it was normal, so we never said anything. But those kind of stories were common. So when Sunday came, we said goodbye to Grandma and Keith picked us up to drive us a few miles back to our house. My mom was planning to stay until Monday morning, when she had to go into work. She wanted to get some chores done at the house and make extra food for our grandma, who couldn't chew very well. Martha and I saw up and explained that he thought we should get flowers and some groceries from when Grandma came home. Mom had called him earlier and told him that they were planning on discharging her that afternoon. We stopped at the store quick and then we went to Grandma's house. Mom was still at the hospital with her, so we let ourselves in and we set up the flowers and then just kind of hung out watching TV. Keith decided to clean up the yard a bit and left us in the house. It wasn't nighttime yet, but closer to evening for sure, maybe about 5 or 6 at night. Martha and I were starting to get hungry. To distract ourselves, we wandered around the house looking at Grandma's things. Old pictures of our moms and aunts and uncles and stuff like that. On the first floor, we heard a noise that sounded like it came from our grandma's room. The door was open, but Martha said she was sure Mom wasn't there yet. She had looked out the window upstairs, and the driveway was empty. I thought they might have arrived without us noticing, and I went to Grandma's room to say hi to her. Martha followed me. When we got to the door, we looked in, and both saw Grandma sitting in her rocking chair. She looked exactly the same as ever, but she didn't say anything to us. Instead, she was sort of staring off into the room. And then Martha and I heard a baby cry. It was very faint, but we both backed up into the living room and checked if each of us heard that. After listening for a minute, we didn't hear it again. Martha went to get Keith to tell him they were back, and I went to find Mom, thinking she was in the kitchen. But after checking the entire downstairs and running back upstairs, I didn't find her. Keith and Martha came inside within seconds. The house phone rang. It was one of those old school phones that hangs on the wall and has a really long cord. Keith picked it up and talked quietly for a little bit. When he hung up, he turned around and told us sadly that our grandmother had passed away at the hospital. They thought she had been doing better. It had actually been what they refer to as rallying, kind of a last-ditch burst of energy before someone passes away. Mom had called the hospital to let us know, and when she didn't reach us at home, she tried Grandma's house. Martha and I looked at each other right away and told Keith we had seen Grandma in her room less than 10 minutes ago. He seemed skeptical. Keith wasn't a superstitious person, but he heard us out. When we were done explaining, he ducked into her room and checked, and said no one was there. He then checked the rest of the house with us close behind, but we didn't see her again. Eventually, my mom came back from the hospital and we told her what happened too. Our theory as a family was that Grandma passed away and her spirit came back to the house for a bit before moving on. The baby we heard must have been the baby that she lost and that she talked about sometimes. None of us ever saw anything in the house again, and Mom had sold it a few years later. But I like to think that Grandma was finally reunited with her baby and found some peace. Since then, I've had other experiences, but I'll save those for another day. When you believe in certain things, you tend to notice a lot more than other people around you do. Hi, Donovan. I've been listening to your channel for a while now. I really enjoy all the stories, and it makes me think about all the things that are happening around us that we don't know about or even understand. I haven't had much in the way of creepy or paranormal experiences in my lifetime, but my wife seems to be more in tune with the supernatural realm and has seen and felt many ghosts over the years. Anyhow, I do have one experience that still haunts me to this day, and I think about it every once in a while. It's in the early 1980s, and I'm in the 10th grade. I play in the concert band, and we're doing a performance at the school one evening in late fall. It all goes well, and I'm walking home by myself afterwards. I would say it's around 10 p.m. The town that I grew up in has a bunch of walking paths. It's dark out, but the paths are well lit and perfectly safe. I was not on high alert at all, just happily moseying my way home like any other day. I'm almost home, just one more gradual slope up a hill, over a bridge, turn right, and I'm there. I reach the beginning of the long uphill slope to the bridge, and I look up and I stop dead in my tracks with an eerie sense of dread. It takes a few seconds to process why. There is a man standing at the top of the hill, probably 50 yards away, just before where the bridge starts, and he's looking at me. It's not unusual to see people along this path. It's fairly well traveled during the day, but it's night and there's no one else around, just me and this guy. Then I realize what made me stop so suddenly. I can only see a silhouette as the lights from the road behind him outline his shape, but he's standing there akimbo with hands on his hips, and he's wearing a top hat. So all of this takes about a second to process, and I realize I'm just standing there at the base of the hill looking up at him. I can sense something that only can be described as pure evil. I know he's looking right at me, and for a brief moment, I'm paralyzed. I can feel him looking at me. My rational brain takes over, and I'm able to step off the path and move behind some trees to block his view of me. I quickly go through my options, keep walking up the path, because obviously my mind is playing tricks on me. Either I saw something that wasn't there, or it's just some guy walking his dog, right? Okay, so I slowly peek out from behind the tree, and there he is, in the exact same spot, in the exact same stance, still looking directly at me, and still wearing that top hat. I could feel this pure sense of evil piercing through my core. Or I could do option 2, run like hell. That's exactly what I did. To this day, I still regret running away. It bothers me that I'll never know exactly who or what was waiting for me at the top of the hill right before that bridge. Did it really happen? In my mind, absolutely. But I can't be sure. If it happened today, I would run up the hill towards him just so I could find out what it really was. If I ever see him again, I will. But it's been over 30 years and still no sign of him. Thanks again for all the great work you do. I know your listeners appreciate it very much. I am excited to finally be submitting my story. I've been hesitant to write in because I'm certain that once I do, there are people around my community that will instantly recognize who I am. And of course, that's when the ribbing will begin. I've decided, though, that I'm ready to face the jokes and the mockery, if it means adding my voice to the chorus that makes up the true believers of the Jersey Devil. As an animal control officer, I've dealt with my fair share of weird phone calls over the years. Nothing will ever top the call I received on August 2nd of 2017, though, because that's the day I came to believe firmly in the beast in question. That morning when I first got to work, I had a note on my desk from a girl who worked dispatch. She scribbled down an address and wrote simply, "Blind Woman, Big Bird." I recognized the address right off, and my mind was officially jogged by the reference to the blind woman. I'd been there a few weeks before because she had a similar complaint. Since the first call, I started taking notice when I drove by her house that the old woman spent a lot of time sitting out on her porch. I guess she liked the fresh air or the sounds of the outdoors. She had been sitting outside every time I had driven by since that first day. And that's where she was the first day I came by, too. She had told me then that sometimes when she sits on her back porch, something very large flies close by the house, and that the sound of its wings was very loud, and had actually created enough wind to knock a book of Braille poetry out of her hands. I didn't know that I believed the second part, but I did know that certain species of birds of prey can be very large and sound even bigger than they really are. I searched the property after the first call, but found no sign of anything taking up residency, and told her that more than likely it was a falcon or a hawk swooping down in her yard for a squirrel, and she shouldn't be too concerned. Now, staring at the note, I figured she'd heard it again. You know how sometimes you just know something is about to turn into a bigger ordeal than you want to deal with? That's exactly how I felt in that moment. I had dealt with her once before, and she wasn't happy with my inability to fix the problem. I had no doubt in my mind that she was going to be equally upset when I came back out and had similar results. Still, it's my job, so I got my stuff together and drove to her house. When I got there, she wasn't sitting on her front porch, though, as she usually did. Instead, she was sitting inside the house. It was nearing dusk at the time, so I thought maybe she was just avoiding mosquitoes or getting ready to have dinner. She soon let me know that I was wrong, and she said, "That thing swooped back down while I was out on the porch and knocked the book out of my hands again." I told her that sometimes large birds of prey will patrol certain areas, and that isn't uncommon to see one swoop the same place more than once. But nothing was living on her property as far as I could tell. "It got my cat," she interrupted. I was stunned. But as sad as it was, there's nothing uncommon about a bird of prey swooping up a pet either. "She pulled it off the porch," she said. Now that was something that I couldn't rationalize. As big and fearless as birds of prey are, they rarely risk interacting with people. If she had been sitting on that porch, there's no way one would have come up and grabbed the cat. I asked her to show me where she had been sitting, and that's when I walked into a gruesome sight. I was glad the old woman couldn't see the blood and the fur smeared and splayed across the porch, or the deep scratches in the wood from claws or whatever had grabbed it. I asked her, "Did this thing make a sound? Have a smell? Anything else you can tell me?" I couldn't imagine what we might be dealing with after seeing this mess it left in its wake. "It smelled like sulfur," she said, "and it was hot. There was heat rolling off of it." It was then that I saw feathers. 3 or 4 large black feathers stuck out from between the planks of the back porch. I reached down and grabbed them, pulling them free. Each was at least 2 feet long. There's not a bird in the area they could have fallen off of. The old woman asked me, "It's that damn Jersey devil, isn't it?" I could have assured her to the best of my ability that it wasn't. I could have come up with some other excuse as to what it could have been and save her from the terror. But I couldn't lie to an old woman. I told her that the Jersey devil was the only reasonable explanation, and that I didn't think she should sit on her porch alone anymore. A few weeks later, a young man came into the station and asked to speak to me. He introduced himself as the old woman's grandson and said he had set up a ring camera on the back porch, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever had been swooping back there. When he showed me the picture on his phone, there wasn't much mistaking what it was. A large black mass and 2 glowing eyes stared into the camera from the middle of the yard, as if it knew the camera was there watching it. I asked him to email it to me, but he never did. A few days later, the house had a for sale sign in the yard, and I never heard anything from those people again. I think I would have moved too. I really enjoyed listening to all the stories you post. I usually listen to them in the evenings when I have a fire going. I honestly never dreamed I would have a story to contribute, though. A few years ago, I jumped on the van life trend. I was between jobs and I'd saved up enough money to be a free spirit for a while. I've always been adventurous and pictured myself traveling around the United States. I was finally able to buy a pop-top van, and then it felt like the whole world opened up to me. It took a while to get some repairs done on it and get everything I needed for an extended trip. But when I was ready, I started up in Washington State, and I kept going down the coast of Oregon and California. My dream was to follow the sun, so I would never really have to deal with winter temperatures. So when November came around, I had landed in Arizona. The sun felt so good. It was around 75 degrees out. I was used to freezing temperatures and snow by that time of year. I had never spent any time in Arizona, so I was really unfamiliar with the area. I was fascinated with the saguaro cactus, so I ended up going through the Saguaro National Park. The things were like 30 or 40 feet tall. I realized they were covered with these little spines, and some of them had an incredible number of arms. They really seemed unworldly. Then someone mentioned Coronado National Forest, and I thought I would camp there for a while. National forests are typically free to camp in, and I was trying to save money. I was planning to be there for several days. I arrived on a weekend and found myself a spot that looked good. There were a few other campers close by, which made me feel pretty comfortable. It was fun for me to just putter around my campsite and get situated. When I was ready to look around the area, I found a good trail and I set out. I really loved the terrain. I had grown up in a completely different area, so this was all new to me. I grew up in Colorado, and I was used to the mountain life. This desert area was really enthralling to experience. It was a strange new land. After hiking a couple hours, I started to head back toward my campsite. Not long after I started walking back down the trail, something caught my eye in the middle of these trees. I could see this strange reptilian creature moving back and forth through the brush. I was so startled to see it. I just stared for a while, and then it turned its head and looked right at me with these piercing yellow eyes. I immediately started to walk at a fast pace toward my van. This creature was moving along as well, keeping its distance but still tracking me. This kept up for what seemed like 10 minutes, until I reached this clearing where I was parked. I got back to the campsite very shaken and nervous. All my years growing up in the mountains, I had never seen anything comparable to that. From what I could gather, it was very large, and it had stood up on its hind legs. It seemed to be about 5 feet tall when it was upright, and had these large black claws. It had a head like a lizard. The weird thing was, when it looked at me, it almost felt malicious. Obviously, I was a complete novice to the area, and had no idea what lived there. But that did not seem right at all. I mean, surely I would have heard about a 5-foot-tall lizard before. There would have to be some kind of information posted on that kind of a thing, right? The rest of the evening was very quiet and peaceful until around 2 in the morning, when I heard what sounded like this strange mix of hissing and clicking. I had my windows open and it was loud enough to wake me up. I noticed a few other campers were outside looking. A couple of them came out and were milling around and talking as well. I went outside and I walked over to them. Someone said it was just some kind of insect or something, but that sound was not like anything else I've ever heard before. We listened for a while, but then the sound seemed to move away. I mentioned what I had seen earlier, and they looked at me like I was a little nuts. So it wasn't just me. The thing that I had seen wasn't anything anyone was familiar with. We eventually all went back to our RVs. I tried to sleep, but felt very uneasy. The next morning, I woke up around 8 a.m. When I stepped out of the van, a woman came to me and asked if I had heard these weird noises. I said that I did, and I had no idea what it was. The woman who was camping nearby said she heard of a few sightings of a lizard man recently. I have never heard of such thing, and if anyone had mentioned it before, I wouldn't have believed it at all. Well, after that, I just wanted to leave as soon as possible. Now, I'm not sure what to think. I decided that I would go ahead and head further east and try my luck in New Mexico. I tried to find information on this lizard man, but there isn't really much to go on. I thought you might want to get the word out there and see if any of your listeners have any ideas what this could have been. When I started attending college in Boston, I spent my freshman year in the dorms. It was a valuable experience overall, but it just wasn't for me. I didn't realize what an introvert I was until I was surrounded by people and activity 24/7. So I decided to find an apartment for my second year. After a bit of looking, I finally found someone who seemed compatible who was looking for a roommate. The place was a little farther from the college than I liked, but I decided to go with it. Before I signed the lease, my roommate told me that the building was built on the site of an old mental hospital. She said she wanted me to be fully informed ahead of time. I guess I thought it was a nice gesture, but I also wondered if I had been better off not knowing. I asked her if that information had affected her somehow. She said not really, but sometimes she got strange feelings when going in and out of the building, and that she'd also heard some weird sounds on occasion. I didn't really believe in all of that stuff. I was just happy to be out of the crazy party atmosphere at the dorm. Too many freshmen apparently had been overprotected in high school and were going crazy without their parents around. Anyway, there were a few other students living in the building, so we got a group together for carpooling back and forth to school. One evening, we had all decided to go into town. Two of us were waiting in the lobby for the rest of the group to get downstairs. I was just standing there looking around the lobby, as I never really stopped there much before, and I noticed that there was this closet near the front door, and it was a bit open. I assumed it was a closet door. It wasn't labeled or anything, and I'd never seen it open. Anyway, I went over to take a peek inside, and it was open. Turns out, it wasn't a closet. It was a stairway. I called to my friend who was waiting with me. We looked down into the darkness, but there was no light switch at the top to turn on. We then looked at each other and said, "What the hell?" And we both headed down the stairs. We walked down slowly, me going first, feeling along the wall the entire way down. Eventually, I felt a light switch at the bottom, which I flipped on. Part of me didn't expect it to work, but I was pleasantly surprised when it did. We stopped and looked straight ahead, both of us looking into what looked like the entrance to a tunnel. That really surprised us, but then we heard others upstairs in the lobby and agreed that we didn't have time to check it out right then. We went back up the stairs and found the others waiting there. We had told them about the stairway, and everyone agreed that we should check it out when we got back. So we headed out and spent a few hours eating and talking about school. Then we decided to head back home. When we got back, we all agreed we still wanted to check out the tunnel. So all 5 of us went down there together to explore. We followed the tunnel for quite a while, and then we came out into what looked like a hospital room, but like a really old one, not modern at all. There were hospital beds and bedpans and a variety of hospital equipment, but really old style stuff, like metal and no plastic anywhere. We found a closet full of straitjackets. In fact, we only knew what they were from seeing them in movies. It was all very strange, but in addition, there was also something out of place. And then it dawned on me. Even though the instruments were old, a lot of them were laid out on trays and looked really clean, like someone was getting ready to use them. And on one of the counters, I found an old note saying, "Give 300 milligrams if any problems." I wasn't sure what it was, but I was thinking 300 milligrams could be a lot depending on what it was. There were all these old wheelchairs lined up along the walls, and there was a bicycle down there, but it didn't look that old. We wandered around not knowing what to think of it all, sort of in total surprise and taking it all in. There were a lot of rooms. It sort of seemed abandoned, and yet the electricity worked in all the rooms. Finally, we got to a far room. When we opened the door, it smelled terrible. My friend reached around and flicked on the light, and instantly we noticed what looked like huge paw prints on the wall. I don't know anything about animal tracks, but these things were too big to belong to anything average sized. There was an examination table in there, and there was blood on the walls. The room really freaked me out. I was imagining something trying to escape from the exam room, like there had been a fight and that caused the handprints on the walls. I think what really freaked me out is the smell kind of seemed fresh. Then I heard one of my friends shouting. I ran toward his voice. He had gone all the way down to the far end of the hallway and had reached a place where the tunnel resumed. I heard this loud growling coming from where he was. and as I approached him, I could see a gate with iron bars closing off the tunnel. Looking further, I could see that some kind of beast was behind the gate. It started howling and snarling and throwing itself against the bars. It looked incredibly angry. It was trying to break down the gate. Its teeth were incredible. I swear it had a double row of teeth and these horrible fangs. It was standing upright, and it was massively hairy, but I couldn't even figure out what it was. If it was an animal or a demon or even a mutant human. It had a short snout and a big humped back. It had to be over 6 feet tall, but not much more. And the smell was unbearable now that we were closer, like rotting meat. We stared at each other, none of us saying much, just breathing heavily, and finally I yelled, "Let's get the hell out of here." We ran back towards the stairs in the lobby, back past all the rooms and back through the tunnel until we finally reached the stairway. We stopped there, and all I could say was, "What in the hell was that?" My roommate was like, "What are we going to do?" We ended up back in our apartment and thought about who to call. At this hour, we figured only the police would respond, so we ended up calling them. When they arrived, 2 officers headed down the stairway and were gone for at least 20 or more minutes. All we could hear down there was them calling out hello, but nothing else. Eventually, they both came back up looking like they had seen a ghost. Then, they taped everything off and took all of our contact information, all 5 of us. They sent us back upstairs and said they would get a hold of us later, but we never heard from them again. We tried to access a police report about that night, but we can't find anything. We were told that someone will get in touch with us about it, but we were never called. We've tried going there and getting it ourselves too, but everything just leads to a dead end. Some of us have even given up and moved on, but me, I'm going to keep trying to get some answers. Hi, Donovan. This story took place when I was about 16. It was 2009 in South Carolina, a little early in the morning before the sun came up. Every morning, I would take our dog out to his runner before I left for school, so he could have some time outside. My mom was home that day, so she was able to watch him while he was out there. I noticed while on the way out to the runner, I saw over the trees to my left a set of 3 lights spaced out evenly that I had never seen before in that direction. We lived in a very rural area, so there were no big buildings, no water towers in that direction, nothing other than woods. I'd lived there for years, so I really know what's in that area. I noticed them since the lights weren't that far away. I tried to listen to a sound as to try to figure out what those things were. Being down in South Carolina, we do have a lot of naval and air bases in the area, so I tried to see if it was some type of plane, even though the planes I've seen never had those type of lights. I should also mention that the lights did periodically turn off and came back on in order from left to right. I stood there quietly for about 3 minutes staring at these lights, noticing that there's no sound. They don't move in any direction. I eventually had to take the dog to the runner so I could catch my bus in time. So the runner was about 25 feet away from the spot I was standing in. From the runner, I could not see the area where the lights were. So I made sure to clip him quickly and run back to the spot so I'd have a chance to watch it for another moment before my bus came. It was a very short span of time. I'd say about 30 seconds. And by the time I rushed back to the spot, the lights were gone. With the lights I've seen from other people's encounters and pictures, I can definitely say that this was a UFO spacecraft, and also my first that I've seen. I've never saw those lights in that area again. I did mention it to my mother since she and I always believed in things that weren't believed by many others. She never mentioned that she saw anything like that, but at least if she ever saw them, she would know that she's not the only one. Looking back now, even though it was early morning, I heard no birds or wildlife in the area. My dog was noticing my behavior, but I feel he also sensed something was not quite right. Thank you for telling our stories, Donovan. Be safe and take care. Me and my family have been in the Atchafalaya Basin hundreds of years, I guess. Far back as we can figure, we've been shrimping, crabbing, and crawfishing these parts, living on a houseboat with power from a generator. Ever since I can remember, I've been hearing stories about the Loup Garou. I think it's the same thing other people call a dog man. I was told the loup-garou mostly goes after kids who are bad, so I always thought it was just a story people made up to keep their kids in line. Now, I'm not so sure about that. See, my brother Jim and I got a shrimp boat, and we go out before the sun rises until after the sun sets during shrimp season. You got to get them during those few weeks because after that, they're gone for the year. The rest of the year, we can get crabs and crawfish, but we make most of our money from the shrimp. It's a lot of work tossing that net out of the boat, hauling it back in, and getting the shrimp out of it. I don't pay a lot of attention to what's out there in the swamp, but every once in a while late at night, we hear a howl, and Jim will say, "That's the loup-garou." I never believed him, but I also can't explain the noise, because it doesn't sound like a dog, a wolf, or a coyote. I never thought about it too much until we started bringing Timmy along. Timmy is Jim's kid. He's 11, but he caught on quick to sorting out the shrimp we keep from all the other stuff that gets caught in the net, like turtles and fish and whatever. I heard the howl more often when Timmy started joining us. Jim stopped saying that's the loup-garou, probably so he wouldn't scare Timmy. Maybe that made me notice it even more. I started ignoring it because we were hearing that howl every night. It sounds weirdly human. It was creepy, but I guess I got used to it. Besides, we were busy, like I said, hauling in the nets. One late afternoon, though, we passed by this small piece of marshy land, and I saw something standing on it, like near the water. I thought it was a person, but it had these weird curved legs. Then it threw back its head. First, I noticed this long dog-like snout. Then I heard the howl. Jim was driving the boat, and he must have heard it over the engine, because he turned in the other direction as fast as he could, which wasn't that fast. I had plenty of time to see the thing lower its head and stare at us with these yellow demonic eyes. I felt like it was looking at Timmy, he behind me. I hoped he didn't notice the thing, but I guess he did because he looked scared too. We were headed toward another shrimping spot, and when we got there, we all started working like nothing happened. Jim took a different route back because we finished for the night. We wouldn't pass by that spot again if we could help it. But then, on the way back, I saw it again. Its fur looked all silver in the full moon. I didn't even think about there being a full moon right then. It almost looked like the moon was a spotlight trained on it. I could see everything, these big muscles under this thick fur, and pointy dog-like ears. I'm pretty sure it was taller than a person too. Maybe 7.5 feet tall, judging by the trees near it. So that was scary enough, but then it showed its teeth. They glinted like swords in the moonlight. They were huge. I could imagine the hole they would make in a person. Jim turned the boat again, but just as he did, this thing leaped into the air and sailed towards us. It was a long jump, maybe 10 feet. I thought there was no way that it would make it to the boat. You can guess I wouldn't be telling this if it didn't make it. It did, just barely. It slammed into the side of the boat, with its front legs gripping the side and the back legs dangling below. I stood there frozen, watching it try to scramble up. I think my brain wouldn't process what was going on. But I finally caught on to the fact that if I didn't move quick, that thing would be up on the deck attacking us. I ran over to the deck and started kicking at its front legs. It snarled at me and pulled its head up, trying to bite my feet. All this time, Jim was driving the boat as fast as it will go, which really isn't that fast. Plus, he had to watch out not to ground the boat. In this marsh, land can kind of sneak up on you. Even though we weren't going that fast, that thing must have been really strong to hang on while we were moving. I had on thick rubber shrimp boots, but one of those teeth caught and made a hole in it. Later on, I doubted what really happened. I looked at the hole in those boots, and I knew it was real. After it made the hole, I used the bottom of the boot to kick harder, right into its face. It tried to bite the boot again, but the bottom was too hard. It couldn't get a grip. I managed to pull my foot back and kick it again. This time, I must have somehow gotten it exactly in the right spot, because it fell back into the water. I didn't see it come back up, but I think it probably did. I reckon at some point I'll see it again. I got a feeling it's not gone forever. I'm not sure how to tell this story in any way that anyone will believe. As far as I know, I'm the only person to ever come across this creature. Nobody I've ever talked to has ever even heard of the thing. And I can't find anything online where it's run into anyone else. I still don't know what I saw, though. I saw it plainly with my own eyes in broad daylight, so there's no way I confused it with anything else. Let me back up for a minute. I'm a longtime listener of your show, and I tune in regularly from my home in Arkansas. This story, though, takes place a little east of home, on Reelfoot Lake in the northwestern corner of Tennessee. I love to fish, and I was out in the lake one day last summer, trying my hardest to hook a couple big catfish for a fish fry I'd promised my brothers, who had promised to come visit me the next weekend. The fish finder on my boat was telling me that there were several large fish swimming directly underneath me. So even though it was the hottest part of the day, I was hungry and thirsty, and about out of ice water. I wasn't moving until I at least caught one or two. It was a sweltering hot day, and I was all alone on the boat. In fact, I hadn't seen another boat in well over an hour by the time I saw what I saw. I grabbed the last bottle of ice water I had out of the cooler and took a seat at the front of the boat. I casted out my line and sat quiet, waiting for a tug on my line. As I wiped the sweat off my face, something came up and bumped the underside of the boat. It was a fairly hard bump, enough to knock me out of my seat, and definitely hard enough that I felt I needed to scoot over and look down into the water to try to figure out what it was. At my first glance, I couldn't see anything. I gave up scanning the water for something big and went back to my seat to take another swig of my ice water. I figured it must have been just a tree underneath the water's surface that I had just passed over. Now, just as I almost sat back down, though, there was another major bump under the boat. This time, I dropped my water bottle, spilling the last of it out into the bottom of the boat. As you can imagine, this made me pretty mad, so I went back to the boat's edge to search again. This time, I was committed to find the culprit, even if it was hard for me to see. I decided to grab one of the oars and pushed around under the boat a minute to see if I could get anything to come up. When I stuck the oar under the boat, though, something grabbed onto it tight, only for a second or two. Then I pulled the oar back up to find the entire paddle of it was missing. Whatever was under my boat had bit that thing clear in two. This is about the time I decided to go ahead and start the boat motor and get the hell out of there. I couldn't imagine what it might be. My initial thought was that some Tennessee hillbilly wacko had cut loose a pet alligator or something. The motor turned over only once before it died. I tried again and it died again. The third time, I couldn't even get it to turn over. I pulled the prop out of the water to see if something was stuck and saw that all the blades were bent. I picked up my phone to call for help, and that's when the damn thing started to come up for air. Under my boat, and I am not kidding you on this, there was a snapping turtle at least 15 feet wide. Well, it looked like a snapping turtle, but I'm not exactly sure what it was. Its head was as big as my torso. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it was there right in front of me. I was so afraid that this thing was going to tip over my boat. Then it submerged itself back into the water, and my boat was about to tip over from the current of this thing submerging itself. I took out my other oar and finally got myself to shore. It took me a while on my way back to the shore, with only one oar and no motor. Keep in mind, it was hot as hell that day. I was so dehydrated by the time I got to the shore. None of my friends believed me, but I swear that's what I saw. I work as a janitor at a high school in Atlanta, Georgia, and there's a small graveyard across the street. I thought it looked pretty old. I never bothered to go look at the gravestones until I had a reason to. I'll get to that reason in a minute. I started working there a few months ago, and for the first month, it was a normal job. I come in around 3 after school's done for the day, clean until 8 or so, or whenever I finish up. It was pretty boring, and as you can imagine, I usually listen to a podcast or music, whatever I'm in the mood for. As it happens, when things started to get strange, I was listening to a mystery podcast, probably because it was around Halloween. So I'm listening to this creepy story, and I turn around with my mop in my hand and trip over this white cat. We get a lot of stray cats around here since the winters are so mild, but I hardly ever see a white cat, especially one like this that was all white. It was long-haired and well-fed, looked like a pet, not a stray. I thought it was probably just visiting, wandering around or whatever, and it would go home soon. When I left, it walked out and down the street, cool as you please, toward the graveyard. It disappeared into the graveyard. I thought it must have gone to one of the houses behind it, since it did look like somebody's pet. I didn't expect to see it again, but it showed up again the next night and trailed me for my whole shift. So now I'm thinking it had to be lost or it's a stray. I took a picture of it and put it up on the Lost Animals social media pages, just in case. When I went out to my truck to go home, it went off toward the graveyard again. The day after that, I brought a can of cat food with me, and when the cat showed up, I opened the can and put it in front of it. The cat just walked away from it. I thought maybe it didn't like the food, so I brought some tuna next time. Every cat likes tuna. Not this one, though. I still didn't think there was anything weird about the cat, though. I hadn't figured out what was going on. I just thought someone else might be feeding it. But if that was true, then why was it hanging around? Sure, it was a little chilly outside, especially at night, but if it was cold, why did it always leave when I did? Maybe I thought it wanted attention, so I decided to try to pet it. But every time I reached down, it managed to sidestep and avoid my hand. I kept trying, though, and I finally got it cornered. It wasn't scared, like it didn't hiss or anything, but it gave me this look, as if it was saying, "Do you really want to do this?" And I reached for it, but my hand went right through. I couldn't believe it. I reached out again, and it sidestepped. That was when I had the thought, this is not a real cat. Okay, so what is it? And what did it want? I felt like it wanted something because it kept coming around and following me. Not food, not attention, so what? I felt like it was trying to tell me something. Every night it walked back toward the graveyard. So one night I followed it. But when I got to the graveyard, it walked behind one of the stones and was gone. Since I was already there, I started to look at those stones. They were kind of messed up, dirty, and so on. But it was dark, so I really couldn't read them. I looked around trying to figure out where that cat could have gone. There are a couple houses past the cemetery. I guessed it must have gone to one of them. I tried not to think about the fact that it looked like it had just disappeared. I couldn't help it, though. I kept thinking about that cemetery. Finally, one Saturday, I decided to clean it up. I loaded up the truck with everything that I thought I'd need. A weed trimmer, bleach, cloths, a pressure washer. I never cleaned gravestones before, but I cleaned everything else, so I figured I could handle it. I wasn't out there 10 minutes before people started just showing up to help. One lady even brought flowers to put on the graves when we were done. I asked a few people if they knew anyone who lost a white cat. No one did. But a couple people said they had seen one hanging around the graveyard. Never during the day, though, only at night. When we were done, the place looked great. Before we left, I took a look at the stone the cat had disappeared behind. The name didn't mean anything to me, but an old guy behind me said, I knew him. He was a janitor at the school. I saw that he died in 1955, age 72. On Monday, the cat didn't show up. I kind of missed it as I cleaned. I mean, it never did anything except for follow me around while I worked, but still, it was some kind of company. I found myself looking for it every time I finished cleaning one room and started another. When it was time to leave, I stood outside for a minute, looking toward the graveyard. Finally, I saw the cat walking toward me. It didn't come all the way, just up to the sidewalk. It meowed, the first time I ever heard it do that. Then it went back to the graveyard. I never saw it again, but once every few months, I go over to the graveyard and clean off those stones. You know, I think that's all it wanted me to do. I want to start by saying I love your show. I'm a bit of a recluse. and I live in a cabin about 30 acres outside of Paducah, Kentucky, in a wooded area. My wife and I believe in self-sustaining and get a lot of our food from natural resources around us. This is why I was out in the woods alone on the morning of June 12, 2019. I was hunting rabbits to make my wife's favorite rabbit stew for her birthday. I know what you're thinking. A crazy couple living in the woods eating rabbit stew for a birthday celebration probably aren't the most reliable source for a story about a Sasquatch. But let me challenge that. Who better would know what goes on out in the woods than us? We're here all of the time. Given that, it was no surprise to me that I ran into one on that June morning. We'd seen evidence of them long before that. Hair caught in high-hanging tree branches, large footprints in the mud, even a few crude tools made from hollowed-out tree trunks with sharpened rocks. We knew they were out there, but we never went looking for them specifically. We respected their peace and they respected ours. As I was hunting rabbit, though, that morning I heard this slight rustling in the bushes in the woods. When I aimed the gun, though, thinking it was a rabbit about to hop into my line of sight, I noticed instead a hairy little foot pulling itself back under the brush to hide. It was small, child-sized, and I knew there was only one explanation for it. Although I couldn't see it, I was standing within feet of a baby Sasquatch. You know what they say about don't mess with a baby bear because mama's somewhere watching. That's exactly what I was thinking right then. As much as I wanted to poke through and take a look, I didn't want to put myself into any danger. I kept my eye out but didn't see any adults. Not even as I slowly walked away from where the baby was hiding. When I got pretty far from the bush, I yelled out simply, "You're safe, baby. I wouldn't hurt you." Then I turned and headed back toward the house. I heard a strange sound from behind me when I turned, a sort of a cooing or a woo sound, but I didn't turn back to look. I did manage to get a rabbit on the way home and made the stew. My wife and I sat on the porch that night looking at the stars, and I told her all about that baby Sasquatch I run into earlier. As I was talking, we looked out across our small yard and noticed something strange move in the distance. It was hard to make it out at first, so I grabbed some binoculars from inside. Sure enough, at the edge of the tree line, that baby Sasquatch stood watching us. I guess its curiosity had been piqued during our run-in earlier in that day. I passed the binoculars to my wife, and she also took a look. We waved at the little guy, but it caused him to turn and leave. That night, my wife and I left fruit and bread on the back step in case he came back. It was gone the next morning. We've been leaving treats out for our friend ever since. We haven't been able to get an up-close look at him, but we do see him from time to time at a distance. He's grown up to be over 5 feet tall now, and has learned to wave back at us when we wave to him. In general, Sasquatches seem to be gentle and caring breed all around. It's my firm belief that if people didn't spend so much time hunting for them, they wouldn't be as scared, and we would probably see them a lot more often. Okay, now on to the picture that Corey sent in from his trail cam. And thank you, Corey, for sending this in. Here's what Corey stated in his email. Howdy, Donovan. Here's a picture of a possible hellhound that I caught on my trail camera standing beside my gut pit. I'm a hunter and butcher and logger by trade. If you look closely, you can see the eye shine, and the ears and the muzzle. They're all similar to a Rottweiler. Sincerely, Corey. Now, if you can't see what Corey is referring to, then take a look at this outline I did in Photoshop. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Did Corey capture a hellhound on his trail cam? If not, what do you think this is? I would love to hear your thoughts. I have a story to tell, but it could potentially get me into some trouble, so I'm going to leave out any clearly identifying details in the hopes it stays anonymous enough that there won't be any blowback. What I will say is this. Many years ago, I worked as a detective for the state police in a state where there are several Native American reservations. Often, we would get called to assist the reservation police on cases that were too complicated for them to solve with their limited resources. As with most things on the reservation, their police forces are often underfunded and limited staffed. This particular case was what appeared to be a homicide. A guy from the reservation, one that none of the neighbors particularly liked, was found evidently beaten to death out in the middle of an otherwise empty field. He was wearing sweats and a t-shirt, no shoes, and looked like he had been pulled right off the couch, except for the fact that the bottoms of his feet were so worn out. He had been running for a long time before whatever happened out there happened. That was the only strange thing about this case, though. It had rained earlier in the day, and we were able to find his footprints in the mud several places leading from his house to the open area where his body was found. The back door of his house was wide open when we got there, and his bare-footed tracks were in the mud right from the start. He hadn't been pulled off the couch. He was chased off the couch. There was only one set of human footprints. I repeat, only one human set of tracks. At several points along the way, we also found what appeared to be large deer tracks running alongside his. When I say large deer tracks, I don't mean large like an elk. I mean large like a human-sized foot, but hooved like a deer. These tracks were also in the front yard, though. In fact, right by the living room window, which had been shattered from the outside. The general consensus among most of the investigators was that someone had come to settle a score with him, and since it was close to Halloween, the assumption was that they had been wearing some kind of costume to freak him out. It was his brother who told me there was another explanation, but once you hear it, you'll understand why I never bothered to present it to my coworkers as a possibility. It's absolutely crazy sounding, but my personal belief is that it is true. You see, this guy had been poaching for as long as he had been old enough to hold a gun. He didn't have a lot of respect for wildlife or game laws, and used some pretty unethical hunting practices, like baiting and spotlighting deer while out on his hunts. He told his brother that one night he was out trying to bait a buck in, when he came face to face with a wendigo, but somehow managed to escape. The problem with escaping a wendigo, though, is that according to folklore, you never really do. Once a wendigo has set its sights on you, it doesn't give up. This guy had about made himself crazy over the last few months, telling his brother about how this wendigo was following him around. He quit his job over it when the thing kept showing up at work. He'd even stopped leaving the house for the most part, and had been pretty close to a hermit status at the time he was killed. The brother's thoughts was that the wendigo got tired of waiting for the guy to come back out of his house, and took matters into its own hands, breaking out the front window and running the guy out the back door. I know what you're thinking. The guy was a kook afraid of a wendigo. The proof for me is in what was found in the broken glass of that broken window. Not only was there blood and short deer hairs all cut up in the glass, but at one place in the shattered remains of the glass, there was a thin strip of satin, the exact kind you pull off a deer's antlers. This guy messed around poaching animals under unfair and horrifying circumstances, and in the end, he got exactly what he deserved in return. In the winter of 2002, I was a police officer in Athens, Ohio, home of Ohio University. As any cop in a small college town will tell you, Thursday nights can get a little wild. Most of the kids leave campus on Friday night to head home and visit their parents. So Thursday nights reign as party nights on campuses. I want to say it was mid-December and the last Thursday before finals week and subsequent Christmas break, making it the wildest Thursday night of the year. Ohio University is home to 4 fraternities and 3 sororities. Needless to say, most of our Thursday night calls centered around the inhabitants of one of the more popular frat houses. In recent months, most of our calls to that fraternity had been centered around a series of practical jokes played on the elderly man who lived across the alley. He had made a few noise complaints, and it had created a sort of an ongoing battle between him and the fraternity. I personally had been called out at least a half-dozen times to deal with these issues, and I can't even begin to guess how many other officers had been sent to deal with the same stuff on their shifts. The old guy's name was Eugene, and it would be unfair of me to make him out as some sweet, innocent man, fallen victim to the immaturity of boys that lived in the frat house. Eugene was a troublemaker too, and had a rap sheet as long as my arm from a lifetime of petty crime, and he certainly got his own blows in during the dispute. Between the fraternity poisoning Eugene's garden with Roundup and Eugene hitting the back windows of their house with a pellet gun, there were at least a dozen other instances of back and forth jabs that had turned from humorous to downright uncivil over time. A few weeks before the night in question, though, the battle came to an abrupt end when Eugene suffered a heart attack and died watching a football game at his sister's house. The whole street had been quiet since he left, and somewhat ironically, the fraternity had held off their partying for a few weeks out of respect for Eugene. It seemed like a worthless gesture, since what he really would have liked was for the partying to let up while he was alive. But myself and the other officers appreciated a few weeks of quiet patrols. I knew they wouldn't skip the Friday before finals, though, so I was ready to handle some more complaints when I checked into work that night. It wasn't long before I got the first call out to the fraternity. Not by a neighbor reporting noise, though. This call from the boys at the frat house themselves. When I got there, they told me they'd been setting up for a party, and someone had stolen a keg off the back porch. I chalked it up to a college prank, and told them the keg would likely resurface later, or at another frat party. They weren't happy with me, but they couldn't argue. They knew by now how these things worked. I got back into my car and answered a couple more calls. A domestic dispute across town, and a Christmas tree that had caught fire. Then I was getting ready to park and wait for my next interaction. I got dispatched back to the fraternity a second time. Again, the call came from the frat boys themselves. When I got there, everyone was huddled in the living room, toward the front of the house. The back door, which faced the alley, had been blown right off its hinges, and was laying flat on the floor in the kitchen. The door facing and all was still attached. I asked what happened, but nobody seemed to really know. They were hanging out and drinking, they said, when suddenly the whole thing flew into the house like a gust of wind had hit it, but there hadn't been any strong winds. The streamers on the back porch were still undisturbed. I looked at the door and there was no evidence that it had been kicked in. It was really puzzling to me. And I was beginning to wonder if the partiers weren't playing a prank on me. It was about that time that someone who was standing and looking out the hole where the back door used to be noticed someone walking in Eugene's backyard. I turned and looked just in time to catch it too. It was clearly a person hunched over and sneaking behind the old shed behind Eugene's place. So I called out for them to stop. I knew nobody was supposed to be over there. I talked to Eugene's sister just the day before, and she told me she wasn't planning to start cleaning the house until after Christmas passed. The figure never came back, though, nor did they emerge from the other side. I decided to head over and have a look. The snow had been falling on a few separate occasions since Eugene passed, and his backyard was blanketed in snow. There weren't even squirrel tracks anywhere to be seen, and certainly not adult human footprints either. There was no person hiding behind the shed, and there was no indication that anyone had been over there at all. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe me and the witness both had been seeing things, shadows from all the Christmas lights and trees around the area. But as I turned with my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of something through the window of the shed. There on the floor in the middle of that locked shed sat the stolen keg from earlier. I knew it was the same keg because their fraternity name was written in black marker on the side of it when they put it on reserve. I never told the kids. I just left it there and let Eugene have the last word. Hi, Donovan. I've really been loving your channel. I always thought there were crazy things happening behind the scenes of normal life. And I love that so many people are willing to contribute here. When I was in college in the Washington, D.C. area, I worked part-time at a country club. It was nice to have extra cash, but I also got golfing privileges with the job. One night we were closing up, which entailed cleaning the last few things and setting things out for the morning. I was working in the dining room and looking out the window. Outside the room we worked in was a small hill that overlooked a golf course. I saw that my coworker had apparently finished what he was doing and was out there messing around with a club at the top of the hill. The window was open, and I heard him calling down and asking us to come look because he thought he was seeing things. There were around 4 or 5 of us that night, and we climbed up the hill and looked off down the course. It was a typical clear summer night with a fair number of stars out, but one of the stars looked too close, and it was moving. At first, we figured it must have been a plane, but it was changing directions in a way too extreme of a fashion. It would hover and then dart all the way across our field of view. We couldn't tell how far away it was, and we couldn't rationalize how any conventional aircraft could do what we were seeing. After watching it for a good 5 minutes or so, we convinced ourselves that maybe it was just some kind of optical illusion or something. We left the hill and finished up closing. When we were done, we went up the hill again to see if it was still there. It was. And now it was either brighter or it was closer. At that point, we decided we wanted to stick around to watch this thing. A couple of the people that we were with went inside to get food for us, and the rest of us just sat down on the hill and watched. For another 15 minutes or so, we watched this thing go from side to side across the sky, and then it hovered in place. And we all agreed it seemed like it was getting closer. At around the time our friends came back, the light changed. It seemed like it was spiraling. It was definitely getting closer. It seemed to be coming toward the country club. But then it suddenly stopped in midair. Its lights got bigger and bigger. It very rapidly appeared to be losing altitude, and then again it just stopped, switching directions completely and then accelerating faster than anything I've ever seen in the complete opposite direction. We were mesmerized. We ate our food, and when we were done, for some crazy reason, we decided to start running toward it to see if we could get a better look. We ran down the hill and up the fairway toward the light. It veered over the woods alongside the course, and we ran after it. At this point, we were following it, and the woods were lit up enough from the glow that you didn't need to worry about running into the trees. We were all excited and yelling about what it could be, but I think that was mainly to cover up the fact that we were all actually really nervous, but no one wanted to admit it. All of a sudden, it stopped and zoomed down sort of above us. Not directly, but enough to really freak us out. And then it just hovered there. It was low enough now that we could see these 5 red circles on the bottom. There were 2 circles sitting above 3 others, like in a trapezoid shape. It was making a loud sort of thrusting sound. After it hovered there for a few minutes, the light shut off and it went completely silent. We could still see the shape of where it was, like a pitch-black darkness above us. And then after a few more minutes of just hovering there, it zoomed off over the horizon with these 5 red lights at the rear. It flew like a rock from a slingshot. It was over the horizon in just a few seconds. In the dark, it looked like a short, fat triangle, and then there was nothing. We were all gasping from running. While we were standing there trying to make sense of it all of a sudden these 2 fighter jets flew over at extremely low altitude, right over our heads. About 3 minutes later, we all saw multiple military jets and helicopters traveling in the same direction the lights had disappeared. At that point, we all just silently agreed to go back to the club. Of course, we never saw anything mentioned on the news or anything like that. I've thought about it often over the years. I still keep in touch with a couple of the people that I was with that night, and we all have the same memory of what happened. I doubt we'll ever get any satisfying answers about all the covert stuff that must be going on out there, but I kind of want to see something like that again. I'm always checking out the night sky just in case. I saw something out in Buzzards Bay in Massachusetts that really freaked me out. My buddy and I were out fishing there last Sunday, and we saw something break the surface about 20 feet away from us. He said dolphin. I said, nah, it's a whale. But then it got closer and we got another look. It was a weird blue-green color, and when it rose up a little, it looked like it had a hump on its back. But it was shimmery, and not the color of a whale or a dolphin, a brighter color, like those fancy tropical fish you can buy. So we were thinking that it was some sort of floating trash that was reflecting the light. I don't know, just bobbing up from the current or something. But the weird thing was, it kept getting closer to us, way faster than the current would bring it. Then it stopped. It disappeared for a few minutes, and I was guessing that it had sunk. A few minutes later, we're just chilling, kicking back with our rods, and the strangest thing started happening. The water began to swirl around us, maybe in a 15-foot perimeter with us in the middle. Little waves cresting and going in a circle around us. I never saw anything like it, and neither had my buddy, because he sat right up saying, "What the hell?" At first I laughed because he's this big guy and he looked a little nervous, while I was thinking there had to be a rational explanation, like we were caught in a school of blue fish or something. But it started getting closer, like the circle was closing in on us. The waves going around us seemed like they were getting taller. Not really tall, but rising enough to make me put down my rod and grab the side of the boat. Now, my boat ain't big. It's a 16-footer, but the force from whatever this was started making the boat swivel too. We weren't spinning fast or anything, but we were doing a circle. By then, we were both like, "What the hell is going on here?" And I said, "You want to get out of here?" And he said, "Yeah." So I tried to fire up the motor, which is a 60-horsepower Yamaha 4-stroke that I just got a year ago. That thing's never given me any trouble, but it wouldn't start. I mean, completely dead. The water was choppy and the boat had started rocking a little, because the waves were spinning us faster around. I just gave up on the motor after about 8 tries, because I was freaking out now too. We just needed to move now. I grabbed an oar and he grabbed the other one, and we paddled right out of that spinning circle. I was pretty relieved because I had this terrible fear that the waves were going to get higher and trap us in. Yeah, I know that sounds ridiculous, but you had to be there. We waited a few minutes and couldn't even see the whirlpool thing anymore, and my buddy said, "You want to go in?" I'm thinking that's a long way to paddle, and pretty soon someone's going to come by. It's a well-traveled area, and they could give us a tow. And the weirdness had disappeared, right? So I just said, "Let's wait," and we cast out our lines again. It was just like 2 minutes later that something big took the bait, and my rod bent almost double. I'm thinking it's a striper. You know, it was only 5 years ago when that fella caught a 65-pound striper right here in Buzzards Bay. Whatever it was wicked big. I was afraid if I didn't tire out, my rod was going to snap. So I let it run a bit, then reeled it in some. I did that a few times. It started going soft, getting tired, so I took up a lot of slack all at once, pulling that sucker in right quick before it caught a second wind. It got closer and closer, and the damnedest thing started happening. The whirlpool thing was back, circling around the boat. I was like, screw this, I'm still getting my fish, so I just kept pulling it in. But then suddenly, I could see what I'd caught. I saw it through the water about 6 feet down. It was no damn fish. This thing had a bunch of legs like an octopus, maybe not 8. I wasn't stopping to count, but more than 4, almost like tentacles. And it was this iridescent color, between blue and green. The body wasn't round either. It was long and skinny, and tapered on one end. I yelled to my buddy to get his camera ready. I needed him to get a picture as soon as I brought the thing up, because I could already tell this was going to be one of those times no one will believe you unless you got a picture. So he grabs his phone and leans over the side a bit. Then he sees it and says, "What in the hell is that?" As soon as he says that, the thing rolls over, and I can suddenly see its head. I couldn't believe it, even though it was right in front of me. This thing had a face. Not a human face, but not a reptile face either. Like a human-reptile crossbreed. The only reference I can think of is the creature from the Black Lagoon, except it had all these crazy tentacle legs. The thing was looking right at me, with these big flat black eyes, and I froze. I stopped pulling. I didn't want this thing any closer. No way. But I yelled to my buddy, "Take a picture through the water now." As soon as I shouted, one of the legs came right up and smacked hard into the side of the boat, right next to where my friend's leaning over. I swear I thought this thing was going to grab a hold of him. He stumbled back, dropping his phone and making us rock so hard I thought we were going to capsize. That's when I let my rod go. crouching down and hanging on with both hands, 'cause no way did I want to be in the water with that thing. The boat steadied, so I leaned over to look over the edge just a little. I couldn't see it anymore. It must have dove down once I let the rod go. But I decided to cut the line. My buddy yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" But man, that thing looked meaner than an eel and must have weighed 80 or 90 pounds. Just judging from its creepy face and the way it moved, it seemed to have intelligence. I wasn't going to play around with it. That was some sort of supernatural something, and I didn't want to mess with it. Anyway, the whirlpool around us was gone now too, so maybe it created that somehow. Or maybe there was more of them around us. Geez, that's a scary thought. Okay, and another weird thing is, when I tried to fire up the motor a minute later, it worked. It cranked up on the second try. Maybe a coincidence. Well, that's it. If anyone else has seen anything weird out there in Buzzards Bay, I would like to hear about it. Hey there, Donovan. This took place when I was in the military. I was stationed at Camp Casey in South Korea. I was a truck driver and had the night shift for about 2 weeks. The roads were pretty empty at night. One night, I was driving down the road that ran parallel to the DMZ, which is where North Korea and South Korea meet. There are no towns or villages in this area, due to the fact that it is heavily guarded by both countries' military forces. This road runs from one end of Camp Casey to the other, about 10 miles long. I was driving along when my headlights caught something moving in front of me on the side of the road about 50 yards away. I slowed down and tried to focus on what I was seeing. It looked like a huge dog or a wolf running very fast. It had long hair and was moving at a pretty good pace. I thought it may have been a wolf that escaped from one of the zoos in Seoul, about an hour away. I watched this thing run across the road and disappear into the rice paddies. I came to a stop after I pointed my headlights off to the right of the road, into the rice paddies where this thing was. I'm sitting there for maybe 20 seconds. Then I see this thing rise out of the rice paddies. I kid you not. It was this same wolf that I saw run across the road. The rice paddies are about 3 or 4 feet tall, and this thing's torso started at the top of the rice paddies. It was there standing on 2 legs looking at me. Its eyes were reflecting in the headlights and looked all weird. I could tell it was looking at me trying to figure out its next move. I could see it turning its head like it was thinking on what to do next. It dropped back down and just took off. I couldn't see it after it moved out of the headlights. Craziest thing I've ever seen, Donovan. It was this dark gray color from what I could tell, and it had a big old head on it too. Hi Donovan, your channel was recently recommended to me, and I've been listening almost every day to all the weird encounters that people have. It reminded me of something that happened to me back in the 90s, and I never been able to explain it. I've always lived in an urban city in New York, but after graduating from college, I met someone with strong ties to the South. When our relationship got serious, I was asked to consider moving down to Georgia. I was reluctant to do that because I had kind of a stereotypic view of Southerners, but I was smitten enough to say yes to the move. I moved to the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. There was quite a bit of culture shock, but I gradually got used to the area and fell in love with it. I think I even started to develop a Southern drawl. We eventually got engaged and started looking around at different areas, trying to decide where we might want to buy a new home. We wanted to stay pretty close to family. My fiance's family lived in a really old house. The history of the place was incredible. There was a lot of documented history about the house's old owners and the activities surrounding the house. There are a lot of underground tunnels in the area. They're pretty much blocked off now for the most part though. But at one point the house was a safe haven for slaves trying to flee from the South. The winter after I moved down there, my fiance's parents were going to visit relatives in Switzerland for a couple weeks. They asked if we would house sit. We were glad to help out. A few nights in, we were just staying home and having a quiet evening, since it was cold and sleeting a little outside, which is rare for the area. We weren't used to the weather being that cold. We went upstairs to get cozy and just gotten into bed when we heard this loud bang. It really startled us, but we figured it must be a door closing because of the wind. That was weird enough, though, because we were in the habit of keeping all the doors closed since it was a drafty house. We turned the lights on and went downstairs. We looked all around. When we got to the dining room, we could not believe what we saw. It's one of those old fancy formal dining rooms. The table in there was completely set with place settings. I mean, everything was laid out. Cloth napkins, the nice old china, their heirloom silver, everything. It was a 10-person table and everything looked perfect. Like a dinner party was about to happen. But the thing is, the table was never set. Nobody uses that room except for a rare holiday now and then. The table was always empty except for a vase of artificial flowers in the middle. We started freaking out and looking around to see if someone had gotten in. My fiancé tried to stay calm and decided to call the police. We were convinced there had to be an intruder hiding somewhere. We were waiting for the police and we went and checked the security system. It was still set. It would have gone off if a door or window was opened. When the police came, one officer did a search of every room in the house, and one walked around the entire house. There were no signs at all that anyone had come up to the house or gotten inside. The police had nothing to go on, and to be honest, I thought they were looking at us kind of weird. Anyway, they finally took off. We were just left there in disbelief, trying to speculate what could possibly explain it. I never believed in ghosts, but I have no freaking idea what happened that night. It's really the strangest thing that I've ever experienced. My fiancé actually called his parents since it was morning in Switzerland by then. His mom said the tableware was definitely not out before. She said she couldn't even remember the last time she used the formal china. His parents were really worried that someone was hiding in the house. We assured them that the police had been through every room and checked everywhere. There wasn't much else we could do about it, so we thought we would just put everything away and try to get some sleep. But first, my fiancé got out the Polaroid that his dad always kept in the kitchen and took a photo just to document the weirdness of the night. We got everything back in the cabinets and went back to bed. I kept hearing every little sound and it was hard to fall asleep, but I eventually did. When we came down the next morning, of course, the first thing we did was look in the dining room. Thank God nothing was out of place. I saw the Polaroid picture laying there that we had forgotten about. I picked it up and looked at how crazy the table looked with all that china on it. Then, in the corner of the photo, I saw this blur. Like how it looks if you're trying to take a picture of something running by really fast. I looked at that corner of the room, and there was nothing there to suggest any movement would have been picked up. For some reason, I got the chills running up and down my spine when I saw that. My fiancé agreed there was no explanation for it at all. As far as I know, nothing else strange has ever happened in the house to the family. I don't understand why, on that one strange night, those spirits or whatever they were tried to freak us out like that. I really avoided that room after that. I only found your channel about a month ago or so, but I really wanted to thank you for it. It makes me feel better to be able to listen to other people's experiences. When I was a kid, I lived in southern Ohio. Me and my sister had a babysitter who lived near the woods. We were really close in age, so we were probably 9 and 10 years old at the time. One day in the summer, we were playing outside with a couple of other kids who were babysat there too. I don't remember why exactly, but we ended up getting in a big argument with them over the rules of a game or something. Anyway, my sister and I refused to keep playing with them, so we decided to go pick some flowers that grew at the edge of the forest. We wanted to get a bouquet to give to our babysitter. There were these gorgeous white flowers that we loved. We thought they were Queen Anne's lace, but we came to find out later that it was poison hemlock. We knew we weren't really supposed to be over there so close to the woods, but we figured we'd just hang out there for a bit, then go right back. We somehow got onto the neighbor's property while we were picking those flowers. We noticed a path leading into the woods, and for some reason, we decided to check it out and see where it led. There was nothing special about the path except for the fact that we didn't know where it went. There were lots of spots where it was overgrown, and you really had to duck under branches to get through. After a while, we came to this little bridge. but the creek bed under it was dried up. We kept going beyond the bridge and eventually we came to a clearing with stones all around it in a circle. Right in the middle of the circle was a huge stone well. We had never actually seen a well before. There were stairs built into the inside walls of the well that spiraled down. My sister found a rock and tossed it in, but we never heard it hit the bottom. I don't know if the well was dry or if the well was so deep that we couldn't hear the rock splash. We started looking around for more rocks to throw in. I was looking around in the bushes at the edge of the clearing and found these huge stones embedded in the ground. Then I realized there was writing on them, like names and dates cut into the stones. It took me a minute to realize they were gravestones. They were in some sort of graveyard in the middle of the woods, far away from anyone. I started getting chills when I realized that. Then my sister appeared beside me really quietly and poked me. She pointed to the edge of the clearing on the other side of the well. She was pointing at a dark shape standing just inside the woods facing us. She whispered to me that it had come up the stairs of the well. I stood up very slowly and stared at this dark shape. My sister grabbed my hand and tried to get me to leave, but I couldn't move. It was like I was actually paralyzed by fear. I couldn't take my eyes off this creature. It didn't move at all until some clouds came over and the clearing became slightly shadowy. Then the shape moved. It was the size of a human adult to me. It looked like it was covered in black feathers. It turned its head toward us and seemed to look right through me with these freakishly weird red eyes. Then it lifted up these big black wings and jumped into the tree behind it. It was perching on a branch like some giant bird out of a nightmare. We finally both turned and ran as fast as we could, back the way we had come. My sister was faster than me, so she made it to the bridge first, but I wasn't too far behind. We ran over the bridge and found the original path, and then I looked back and saw that thing standing there at the edge of the bridge. Just standing there. I screamed and kept running. I tripped over the root in the path and ripped my pants and tore my knee, but I just got up and kept running. We burst out of the trees screaming and crying and ran into the house. Our babysitter tried to calm us down and said there was nothing like that in the woods, but it just made us more hysterical and determined to convince her. I don't even know what finally calmed us down. It took both of us a long time before we'd ever go back on the deck again. Everyone was convinced that we had made up a story with our hyperactive imaginations. When I got older, I sort of tried to make sense of what we saw as some kind of weird psychological reaction to picking hemlock. But the fact that my sister and I had the same exact experience made no sense at all. I know what I saw was real. I probably don't remember all the details exactly since it happened almost 40 years ago, but I'll never forget the level of fear that I had. I have a scar on my knee from when I fell so hard that day. I guess it's a good reminder that there are strange, unexplainable things in this world, and that I should probably have a healthy respect for the unknown. I don't live in fear or anything now, but I tend to believe people who have strange stories to tell. At the risk of everyone knowing who I am when they hear this story, I'm going to go ahead and tell it publicly, because I think it's worth sharing with a wider audience than my friends and family. In 2020, following my divorce, I bought a tiny house in the small town of Bradley, South Dakota. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom, one-bathroom, cottage-type home, across the alley from an old church that had long since quit holding service and started falling apart. Bradley is a very small town, with a Mayberry-type feel. Everyone knows everybody. The kids and dogs run the streets freely, without anyone bothering too much with them. There's even an old woman a couple blocks over, with a pet peacock that runs wild with the kids. When you envision a small, weird little town in the middle of nowhere, it's Bradley, South Dakota. So I wasn't expecting much trouble on that day that I moved in. In fact, the first few weeks that I was there were pretty boring. Nothing happened at all. I spent the time fixing the house up, just how I like it, and literally, in some cases, watching paint dry. It was my 10th night in the house when I first saw the little girl. I was watching TV in the living room and heard something shuffling around in the hallway. I couldn't imagine what it might be, and thought maybe one of those free-range kids or dogs had made its way in through the back door, so I got up to go check it out. She didn't look like she was more than 3 or 4 years old. She was filthy, covered in dirt from head to toe, and her hair was matted and twisted up in clumps. The only clean thing on her were 2 streams down her face where the tears had washed the dirt away. She startled me when I first saw her. Then I got concerned. I hadn't seen that kid before, and whoever she was wasn't being cared for properly, if her appearance was any indication. I asked her, "Honey, what's your name?" But she didn't respond. She just kept staring at me blankly, almost fearfully, like she couldn't tell if I was a good person or a bad one. I tried talking to her again. I asked, "Are you hurt?" And she wouldn't tell me. I went back to the living room to get my phone, and when I came back, she was gone. I called the local sheriff and made a report, hoping he'd be able to tell me something, or maybe even come out and find the girl. Strangely, he didn't seem all that surprised what I was telling him. He just told me not to worry about it and go on to bed. The same thing happened 3 or 4 times a week from that point on. I tried taking a photo of her with my phone one night, but she ran away the second she saw me point that thing at her. It was like she knew what I was trying to do, and she didn't want to be identified. Finally, I started asking other neighbors about the little girl, and if they knew anything. Most of them acted like I was absolutely crazy. A few, though, seemed to know who I was talking about, but acted very much like the sheriff, telling me not to worry and that they were sure she was just fine, whoever she belonged to. I decided the only way to make it stop was to buy a new lock for the back door. I had been locking the door, but the house had been there and had the same key for God knows how long. A new lock, I thought, might take care of the kid being able to run in and out, especially if she somehow had a copy of the keys from the past tenant. The new lock seemed to work. I didn't see her for about 2 weeks. Then one night, I was startled awake by something cold touching my face. When my eyes opened, the little girl was standing there by my bed and jumped backwards, every bit as frightened as I was. She took off running out the door quicker than I could get out of bed. This time, I was determined to get an answer about who she was. I wasn't going to continue to live this way. I drove down to the sheriff's station myself and asked to speak to him in person. When I told him who I was and that I needed an answer about this kid, he looked reluctant to tell me anything. Then he finally, I guess, decided there was no point in covering it up anymore. He admitted he didn't know her name, who she was or who she belonged to, but that he had been getting calls about her for years. Now that didn't make any sense to me, because she wasn't old enough to have been causing trouble for years. I imagined she was just finally old enough to turn a doorknob herself. So I told him I didn't believe a word of what he was saying. If she had been around for years, she's a damn ghost, I said. That's when he raised his eyebrows at me, and I knew that is exactly what he was trying to imply. It took a while, but I did finally figure out her name. I visited every library in the Tri-County area, sifting through old newspapers until I finally came across an article from 1910. A little girl who lived right on the same property I now live on had apparently died of scarlet fever and been buried in the churchyard behind the house. For days after her death, her mother would sit outside, saying she could hear the girl crying. At first, everyone said it was the crazy hallucinations of a grieving mother. Finally, though, the mother insisted that they dig her baby back up to check. They obliged, thinking one final look at her daughter's body might help her make peace with the loss. When they did dig up the girl, though, they found her flipped over on her stomach, her hands twisted up in her hair, and her poor little fingernails clawed right off into the wood casket. She had been buried alive and come back awake after some time. The wailing her mother had heard was really her. She came back around one more time after I learned who she was. I called her by her real name, Rachel, and told her that I was sorry she woke up scared and alone, but that if she had let go of this place, she could pass on and be with her mommy and daddy in the world that comes after this one. She wiped the tears from her eyes and smiled at me and skipped away. I haven't seen her since. Hey Donovan, I'm a New Yorker, so I'm going to be blunt. I saw an alien. I know that sounds out of this world, no pun intended, because I'm not some rusty old farmer whose cows keep getting chopped up in crop circles. But I straight up saw an alien, more than once. I like to garden. The building I live in has a rooftop garden, mostly herbs and vegetables, because food is so damn expensive now. It gets pretty crowded up on the roof, with all the tenants who want fresh air, so I do most of the gardening late at night. I even made the super install motion-activated floodlights up there for me, so I don't have to worry about bringing my own light. I've been retired for 7 years, so I don't mind staying up late if it means I get the whole roof to myself. Not too many places in the city you can go for fresh air and have the place all to yourself. Anyways, I'm up on the roof digging into some mint when the floodlights start going haywire. They're flickering like it's a disco party. I'm 3 seconds away from throwing my shoe at them when the bulbs burst. A spark hit me in the back of the neck and gave me this burn. This really put me over the edge because I was already in a bad mood. Some of the younger tenants in my building like to crack open a few drinks on the roof after work. Nothing wrong with that, but tonight they were being pretty loud, and they left a bunch of cans in the planting beds and left. Total scumbags. I take my phone out to give the superintendent a piece of my mind about his cheap lights and littering tenants. But my phone just gives me this static and flickers on and off. At this point, I'm pretty sure I'm about to see a ghost, because I've watched enough paranormal movies to know how this goes. But then everything just goes black. And I mean everything. The whole block goes dark. New York never actually gets pitch black, but everything around me was out. All I could see were stars. A power outage is scarier than a ghost if you ask me. So I'm pissed. The elevators aren't going to work, and I can't risk going down the stairs in the dark with my bad hip. I can't even use my phone as a flashlight because that thing isn't working either. So I have to sit on the roof in the dark by myself. The air started to hum. It sounded like an old computer overheating. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. I couldn't figure out what direction the humming was coming from. Then a silvery fog surrounded the roof. I was more than a little freaked out. The roof always has a pleasant earthy aroma, but now it smelled like wet, rotting plants. Not swampy, but cold dirt and decaying plant matter. I saw something gliding in the mist towards me. It was short, with a round head and a stomach. Its arms and legs were thin. These large black eyes looked me up and down like a Sunday chop. I thought maybe I fell over and smacked my head when that spark hit me. And this was all just a hallucination. Sadly, I didn't have head trauma. That little round guy reached out with a single long finger. I stepped back and fell into my own planting trough. The alien prodded me in my hip with its extended finger. Then it compared it to my other hip. Somehow this creature was able to tell that I had hip replacement just by looking at me. It made me a little nervous about what else it could see through with its black, orby eyes. I got out of the planter and limped away from this alien without taking my eyes off of it. It did not seem very concerned with me anymore. Its attention was now on the mint plants I had crushed by falling on them. A long-fingered hand reached in and grabbed a handful of crushed mint leaves. The alien's fingers sizzled gently, but it didn't seem to be in any pain. It just turned its hand over and analyzed the leaves. I wasn't interested in the spectacle anymore. All of this close encounters with the fourth kind stuff was above my pay grade. So I walked towards the stairs, but the farther away I got from the alien, the thicker the silvery fog became. I tried to walk through it, where the stairs would be, but I felt resistance. It was like walking through jello. The closer to the edge I got, the thicker it became. It quickly became too strong to fight, and I stopped walking. My body slid back to the center of the roof, like the alien was the center of some kind of gravity field. The alien didn't even spare me a glance. It just kept analyzing all the different plants in the garden. I had to just stand there and wait, not knowing what to do. It was surreal. Here I was with a species from another planet, and it felt almost comical, like an awkward situation out of Seinfeld. Eventually, the humming returned, and the fog retracted like it was being sucked up by a vacuum. The alien disappeared with the fog. I didn't see any kind of ship or spacecraft. But at that point where the mist disappeared, there was a blank darkness that blocked out the stars behind it. The edges of it vibrated slightly. A bright silver light cut on and then shot straight up into the sky, made a 90-degree turn without slowing down, and shot off into the horizon like a firework. I sat on that roof until dawn, not knowing what the hell to think. The building super showed up and told me that my phone had left him a voicemail, what sounded like sonar signals. I got calls the rest of the day from people saved in my contacts, telling me the same thing. I think the Pentagon should be paying more attention to this kind of stuff. How's it going, Donovan? I got a hell of a story for you. Most people don't believe me, but it happened 2 years ago. I'm a pretty heavy outdoorsman. Hunting, fishing, hiking, the whole 9 yards. I even do some real niche activities too, like snake hunting. I haven't met too many other snake hunters. Most people don't even know it's a thing that you can do. Where I'm from, you can catch timber rattlesnakes if they are at least 2 feet long. Calling it hunting might be misleading. It's more like a scavenger hunt. I go out with a hollow plastic tube that has a mark at the 2-foot line and a pair of snake tongs. To put it simply, I grab the snake in the tongs, pop it into the tube, and if it's past that 2-foot mark, I get to keep it and make a belt out of it. The best place to find rattlers is in the rocks. Timber rattlesnakes are not as aggressive as their more famous western cousins. They are very shy, so if you want to catch them, you have to be real sneaky and grab them when they're basking in the sun on rock knolls. The trick to know is which rock piles get sun exposure at which points in the day, so you can skulk around them and hopefully get lucky. I was stalking all my usual knolls when things started to get weird. This was all on public land, in a state forest. I'm not going to say which one because I don't want internet yahoos traipsing around my backyard and getting themselves killed looking for what I encountered. When I got to my first rock pile, everything was silent. No birds, no bugs, no nothing. Then, as if a gun went off to start a race, 3 sizable rattlers came out of the rocks and hauled ass downhill. I've never seen snakes act like that before. They usually bury themselves deeper when threatened, but I didn't think I was loud enough to spook them either way. I picked my way down the trail in the direction the snakes went. I was careful where I stepped, because I didn't want to come up on those snakes unprepared. I'm crazy, but I'm not stupid. The trail took me up a ridge and down into an open valley with a creek running along the bottom. The creek was split into a fork by a large rock formation in the center. I stopped in my tracks when I saw at least a dozen rattlesnakes perched on the rocks. It was an absolute gold mine, but I was nervous about how I would approach that many snakes. Like I said, the timber rattlers are less aggressive than other species, but that doesn't mean I want to get stuck in the middle of a crowd of them. I waded into the creek and slowly approached the rocks. I was more concerned with being quiet than visible. I'm pretty sure snakes have a crappy eyesight. At least that's what I've always heard. I wasn't planning on being greedy. I just wanted to grab the nearest snake and maybe snap a picture or two of the snake party for my buddies. But then all the snakes lifted their head in unison and glared at something behind me. Rattles and hisses were all I could hear. I wanted to look behind me, but I was also afraid of turning my back on a batch of irritated rattlesnakes. The sounds of splashing became close enough that I knew whatever the snakes were hissing at was right behind me. I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. All the snakes suddenly became quiet. Everything was silent except for short, snorting breaths of the thing behind me that was taking in my scent. When I was finally man enough to turn around, I got the shock of my life. I was prepared for a bear or a hog. Both of those things would have been pretty scary enough. But what I saw looking back at me was horrifying. Yellow slitted eyes with black pupils looked down on me with this curiosity. Its skin was grayish green and covered in rough scales like an alligator. The snout was lizard-like and filled with pointed teeth. The reptile thing towered over me, easily 7 or 8 feet tall. Huge black claws were at the ends of both hands, and they slowly reached for me. I panicked and flung my snake tongs in the tube at the reptilian. and then dove deeper into the creek. I half swam and ran in the waist-deep water until I got to the bank and sprinted up the ridge to the path. I ran down the path until my legs burned. I was back near the first rock pile where this whole mess started. I hid inside a divot in the rocks that made a crawl space-sized cave. I could hear this creature sniffing the air. It casually followed my trail. A black-clawed foot stepped onto a space right in front of my hiding spot. I could barely fit into this space, so I knew the creature didn't have much of a chance to get me. It stood there at the mouth of the opening, sniffing and lapping air with its tongue. The creature kept me there for hours. I even got a picture of its foot. I started to lose it. All I could think about was the scene from Jurassic Park, when the raptors stalked the kids through the park. I wanted to laugh and cry all at once. Eventually, it just walked off. I stayed in place for hours afterward, until I heard the voice of my wife and oldest son calling my name. They were worried and had come looking for me. I sprinted out of that hole and got them out of the woods as fast as I could. I was not about to risk my family running into that creature. Anyway, that's my story. When I got home, I hoped I was just crazy, and I wish I didn't have that picture I took. Then maybe I could tell myself I lost my mind for an afternoon. I can't stop thinking about what else might be out there. Camping is a big part of my life. I'm a Jersey boy not far from Trenton, so most of my life is a congested mess of traffic on the Garden State Parkway, and stoplights for as far as the eye can see. I love the city life, but it gets crowded. I need to recharge my batteries every now and then. Going out in the woods by myself is the perfect form of therapy. My family used to think it was weird when I would go camping alone, but over the years they've just accepted it as one of my many quirks. I've even taken my younger siblings out with me, but it never stuck. They'd rather stay home and play video games. No one else in my family is into the outdoors. They are born and bred city people. I was exposed to the outdoors after watching a documentary on Yellowstone. Since then, I've had an intense interest in the wild. Few people realize that Jersey actually has a lot to offer in terms of nature. The Pine Barrens is a huge tract of wilderness that is seldom explored. Whenever the city is getting to me, I don't have time or the funds to plan an elaborate wilderness excursion. I just run to the Pine Barrens. I typically go every few weeks, and I explore a lot of different sections each visit. I have a very detailed map of the area, and I mark off each section that I've camped in and hiked through. I was planning on stepping foot of every inch of ground in the park, but now I think I've seen enough. My last trip in the Pines started off as it normally did. I was in the southern part of the Pines called Wharton State Forest. It was a favorite of mine because it's one of the biggest continuous sections of wilderness in the state of New Jersey. The hike in was beautiful, and my first night I slept soundly with no issues. I made good time getting to my first campsite, so I decided to hike further into the forest and stay another night before making my way back the following morning. There are some great wilderness campgrounds in Wharton that are only accessible by kayak. I rented one from the recreational grounds and paddled out to the less traveled parts of the forest. It's a beautiful area with all kinds of interesting wildlife, but as I approached the riverbank, I felt like something malicious was watching me from the underbrush. At the time, I thought I was just being stupid. An experienced outdoorsman should not be scared by superstitious feelings, but alarm bells were going off in my head. The sun was beginning to set as I pulled my kayak up onto the bank and tied it off. I caught glimpses of faintly glowing eyes in the dark out of the corner of my eyes. I laughed at myself for being paranoid. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It was warm, but I opted to set up my full tent instead of just a tarp. My nerves were on edge, and I slept uneasily. I couldn't put a finger on why I was so anxious. Then I realized the forest was utterly silent. No hum of bugs or chirping crickets. I poked my head out of my tent to see if I could hear anything. A hot, dry wind prickled the skin on my face, and the smell of sulfur hit my nose. A pair of faintly glowing eyes peered out at me, low in the tree line. Some predatory creature was stalking me. I watched in terror as the eyes floated up in the dark several feet above where a normal person's head would be. The creature stepped out of the trees. and I saw its horse-like head slide into the light. I let out an involuntary gasp, and the creature's leathery wings snapped open. It opened its mouth and let out this growl. Steam vented from its throat, like it had a small fire inside of its belly. I ran for the kayak. It was a short run, but I smashed through the underbrush and cut up my unprotected legs. I almost had a heart attack trying to undo the knot that tethered the kayak. I pushed the boat into the water and jumped on. I was about halfway across the river when I heard the beating of giant wings. It sounded like flags snapping in the wind. The creature was circling above my boat like a massive vulture. I could make out the faint glow of its eyes and puffs of smoke hanging in the air. It dived for me like a hawk. I jumped out of the kayak and hung off the side. It smacked into the kayak, causing it to bounce against my head and bust up my face. Some water must have splashed on the creature. I heard a sizzle like water on a hot pan, and a high-pitched screech from the creature. It beat its wings and went back to circling me in the sky. I was halfway across the river, and I decided I was better off swimming the rest of the way. There is very little current, so I made it to the opposite riverbank without trouble. I knew the creature did not like water, so I used the rope for tethering the kayak to myself. To some tree roots at the edge of the water. I finally relaxed and just kept my head out of the water. The creature landed on a tree above me. I couldn't see it, but the sulfur smell and hot, dry air hung around for several hours. Eventually, I heard the snapping of wings, and whatever it was flew off. I've never been more relieved in my life. I made it back to the more populated area of the park, and some nice hikers gave me a spare set of clothes. I told them my canoe got overturned on the river when they asked what happened to me. I didn't think anyone would believe what happened to me until I came across your channel. Hello, Donovan. I'd like to share a story of the paranormal that happened to me back in 1982 in Connecticut. I was working a second shift and I was on my way home about 10 p.m. I drove an AMC Gremlin at the time. Suddenly, I look at my rearview mirror, and there was a man sitting behind me with no face. Where his face was supposed to be was just darkness. My eyes welled up with water, uncontrollably, as if I was crying, but I wasn't. It was true fright. I slammed on the brakes and turned around really quick in my seat, and no one was there. I mentioned that I drove a Gremlin, because anyone who knows about those cars knew the back seat was basically useless. There was really no room, maybe just for kids, so for a man to be sitting back there would be impossible. I sat for a moment trying to get myself together, trying to justify to myself that it was just a weird reflection of some sort. So I continued on my drive home. I picked up the pace a bit and I just wanted to get home. I was almost on my street when he appeared again in my back seat. I slammed on the brakes again and turned in my seat, and he was gone. I was so freaked out, I drove my Gremlin up on my street so fast, I skidded to a stop and ran into the house. I never told anybody about it. To this day, I have to drive with my rearview mirror set to night vision. Whenever I'm alone in the car at night, I get freaked out that it may happen again. Well, years later, I was working for DHL, the courier company. In the early days, we drove vans that were only equipped with AM radios. One Halloween, while I was working the day shift at DHL, I was listening to a local radio station, and they were interviewing the Warrens, the famous ghost hunters. One caller asked Mrs. Warren, what's the difference between a good ghost and a bad ghost? She said a bad ghost has no face. I got my answer several years later. It sent a chill down my spine. I've had a lifetime of paranormal activity. I grew up in a haunted house, and I'm still dealing with it to this day. I don't go looking for it, but somehow it just finds me. We could be here all night with the stories that I could tell you. I think because I have clairaudience, the ability to hear spirits, that's the reason it's been happening to me my entire life. Thank God I have the ability to turn it on and off. If you would like to hear other stories, let me know. I'd be happy to share them.